patriarchy and culture at work has relied so much on this idea of scarcity, and therefore women being grateful for being in that senior position. And that gratitude makes us compliant. It stops us voicing our opinion because we don't want to upset the apple cart. And then the boundaries go and we take on more work that's unpaid. We take on, we do work for no reward. Everything just creeps, and then we suffer overwhelm, and then we fail. Send an email out and I'd spend the next half a day worrying about what I was going to get by way of response. That's such a waste of energy. We need more women to take up the baton, so more experienced women who can role model and help younger women coming up through the ranks and not pull the ladder up behind them. But we also need male allies.
My mission is to embolden every woman in the C-suite or on the rise to claim her agency and challenge the norms holding her back. This show offers candid conversations with powerful business leaders sharing their real stories of success and failure. Join us right now. Hey guys, it's your coach, Dr. Cynthia. So excited for today's guest. She has 25 years of experience as a C-suite marketer throughout the UK, left her corporate job in September of 2019 to found First Woman, working with professional women who wanted to up-level their careers, move into levels of leadership, hit that C-suite eventually. She's an ardent supporter of equality and female talent and gender equity. And I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that a couple of years ago, when I was starting to move into this space and looking for people that I could look up to and learn from, I stumbled upon Mel Stanley's podcast and became a raving fan and remain one still today. So it is such a privilege and honor, Mel, to have you. She's also the author of Success Without Compromise, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So thrilled to have you. Welcome.
Thank you for that intro. I'm honored to be here. And I'm so excited that you started a podcast. It's such a way to get the message out there, and we still need to get the message out there. So good for you.
Mel has suggested that she's moved into her encore career, and so taking on fewer clients these days, but still has so much to share. And as we talked about in our pre-chat, there's a long way to go.
Yeah, I love the idea of an encore. I hadn't thought of that, but it is definitely, I'm definitely in the sort of final chapter of my 10-year plan. So I'm still doing private coaching, but I've stopped doing the corporate coaching programs at the end of December 23, actually. So I had 24 to write the book, as you mentioned. And, you know, it's sometimes you write these books in the moment and you think, well, is it going to be relevant in 12 months' time? Because business moves so fast, culture moves so fast, society perhaps less so. But I'm convinced with what we are seeing going on around the world, particularly in the US and in the UK, the rollback of equality, DEI, the level playing field, and the structures that go with that, like flexibility at work, which impacts women so much more than men. All of these things are being brought back. And I think, young women aspiring to leadership nowadays have got perhaps an even bigger task, slightly different perhaps than what you and I had, but certainly as big a task as we did. So the book remains relevant, I think, which is absolutely great, because even though some of the case studies and some of the stories are 6 months old, the theory, the practice, the sentiment of the book is still bang on the money. So, but that's a little bit sad, because I always hoped when I started First Woman, as you say, in 2020, that by the time I hit my encore, I would have seen fundamental change, and there was. But now we have this tranche of the patriarchy who are claiming that it's all gone a little bit too far and that women's rights are too advanced now, and it's all happened at the expense of men, which I know I don't agree with. I know that's quite a contentious statement, but I don't agree with that. I still think women are nowhere near equal in terms of opportunities to their male peers.
I mean, we see that in the data, right? We see that in the wage gap. We see that in the percentage of women that are sitting in C-suite roles or higher level roles. You actually called it that equality is under attack, and
Yes.
you sort of framed some of that. When you think about what women are dealing with today, I would agree with you. I think, we've been talking about this for decades, right? And then as you've entered your encore, you've sort of warmly handed up the continuation of the movement to people like myself and others to continue the good work. It feels like it's a slow go, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And we need, I think you're talking to Jeremy Stockdale as well in one of the episodes, and we need more women to take up the baton, so more experienced women who can role model and help younger women coming up through the ranks, and not pull the ladder up behind them. So we need lots of more experienced women to, as I say, to role model, but we also need male allies like Jeremy.
Yes.
Male allies are so important, and that's why this whole zero-sum game of you're either on my side as a woman and therefore you're against me as a man, and vice versa, helps nobody. It doesn't have to be like that. I talk in the book about the pie is big enough for both genders and minorities, or however you want to cut it. And if it's not, bake a bigger pie. Have a bigger table. There is no need for anybody to be fighting over the scraps and worrying and feeling threatened that one area of society is getting more benefit than to the detriment of the other. That's just I just think that's wrong. I think Jeremy will talk about that as well.
Yeah. I also have an American fellow that'll be on as well, Brandon Maslin, and also a wonderful ally here in the States. And you're right, we need more men and women linking arms, but also you make such a good point about women supporting women. Sometimes we are the most difficult, right, when it comes to supporting and shining a light and amplifying other women, because we lead so often with this scarcity mentality rather than the abundance mentality that you just mentioned, right? Make a bigger pie. And if you look at the workforce statistics, there's plenty to go around.
But I think you're right about that mentality. And, I think the patriarchy and culture at work has relied so much on this idea of scarcity, and therefore women being grateful for being in that senior position. That almost like, because they've had to work so hard for it, generally, much harder than their male colleagues. And they're so grateful to be in that position. And that gratitude makes us compliant. It stops us voicing our opinion because we don't want to upset the apple cart. It keeps us quiet and it keeps us contained when we should be knowing our worth and being out there loud and proud and absolutely at 100% standing in, and having agency for our position. And yet we don't. It's like, oh, I'm so grateful. Thank you so much for putting me here. Thank you so much for putting me here. And then the boundaries go and we take on more work that's unpaid. We take on, we do work for no reward. Everything just creeps, and then we suffer overwhelm, and then we fail. And then those who chose to turn around and say, told you women can't lead.
I was literally working with a woman this week at senior director level or director level in a Fortune 10 company. And she said exactly what you were just saying. She said, I've been put into 3 different jobs, all lateral. They put me in because there's a massive, fire that needs to be solved. I go in, I do the hard work. I'm working 80 hours a week, also a mom working 80 hours a week. I solve the situation. I stabilize the team. I get a pat on the back. They promote somebody into that role to maintain it. with no salary adjustment and no promotion, they put me on the next fire drill, right? And she says to me, but they're flexible, which is really nice. I'm able to pick up my child when I need to. And I know the company is struggling with, the economy and the constraints. And my manager's nice, their hands are tied. And I'm thinking, this is exactly what we're talking about. And so when we talked about relevance at the top of the podcast, that was the case a decade ago, 2 decades ago. This was the case this week. So it's that loyalty, right? It's that gratitude that, oh my goodness, they let me, pick up my child on time, that clouds our
Absolutely. Yeah.
our agency and our judgment. So for the person listening, right? The woman listening who says, yep, that's me.
Yeah.
What advice do you have? Where do we start?
Oh my goodness. I wrote a whole book about where we start.
Right. Yeah.
It's interesting because, no, seriously, there's as you'll know, there's a middle section in the book that talks about the behaviours that get in the way of women being promoted. And some of those behaviours, to be fair, apply to men. But mostly it's the behaviours that get in the way of us being promoted. And there is, a really big argument, which I support. And that is, you shouldn't need to fix the women. You need to fix the system, the cultures that they work in. So they don't feel overly the gratitude. So they don't feel that because they can have the flexibility to pick the kids up from school, they should therefore overcommit 150% to make up for that. So there's all of that going on in the background. But the problem is, as I said, I support that. But to your point, things aren't changing, and they're not changing. If they are, it's the glacial pace. So we cannot, as women, wait for the system and workplace cultures to change so that then it benefits us. We have to be making that change from the inside, and therefore we have to be part of that change.
Agree.
It's a difficult one to do because sometimes you're out on a limb. But one of the things that I struggled with a lot during my career, and I really came to the realization, honestly, in the last sort of five years of work, that you have to be true to yourself. I hate the word authenticity, I really do, and I hate authentic leadership because workplace cultures can make it incredibly difficult for an individual, women and men, but particularly women, to be authentic because of the system in which they operate, because they feel the need to fit in, because they don't want to speak out of turn, because it might be career limiting to do so. So we compromise. That's what the book's about. We compromise who we are, we compromise what we say, we compromise how we present ourselves in order to fit into this cookie cutter model of what is right for that particular company where we work, that particular set of circumstances. So I think the first thing is to be really true to yourself. I was told, and I talk about this in the book, I was told, for example, to knock the rough edges off. I'm very big into colour energies and insight, the insight program, and I'm a red.
Okay.
You might be too. Reds are very direct. They're reductive in their communication, so they get to the point quickly, which can sometimes come over as blunt and rude, but that's the way Reds communicate. People found me offensive because I didn't engage in the, necessarily too much small talk, and I wasn't scared of asking incisive questions, like why? Why are we doing this? And I remember once I was told by a male department of head that asking why was quite confrontational, because it was questioning decisions and questioning opinion. Well, I thought I was, paid in the rank where I should. It's our duty to ask questions and be inquisitive.
Sure.
And make sure that the direction that is being taken is correct and it's been looked at and debated. That's the point of being a leader. So that was one of the things. And the second was knock the rough edges off of my communication style. And, I got to the point where I was so worried about upsetting people. Particularly, it was more easy when I was face to face because people could see my face. But, as it got more digital me, everything over email and WhatsApp and everything, I got to the point where I had somebody I worked with who I trusted who used to check my emails. I would send them to him and say, Simon, can you check these for tone before I press send? Because I was so worried about how it was going to be received and perceived. Years later, that was why I got my final job, because I told it like it was. And they needed people, or they thought they did, that were there to kick the tires and question conventional wisdom. But for many, many years, I reacted negatively, and it was difficult. It was exhausting. The paranoia, the fear of meeting yourself coming backwards because you're so worried about what you said. I'd send an email out and I'd be spend the next half a day worrying about what I was going to get by way of response. So that's such a waste of energy. Such a waste of energy.
Really having to play small, right? Having to sort of, you're saying be true to yourself, which I love that, but it's not going to be easy. And so are you suggesting that even though it's not easy, be true to yourself, and at some point, an organization that is right for you is going to appreciate that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And to be honest, if you're in an organization where you can't be true to yourself, if you feel that you are, as you say, you have to, dumb down in order to fit in, then it's the wrong place. Find a new job. Mm-hmm. Likewise, if there's, you're finding that with a boss, a manager that's making you behave like that is, holding you back and gatekeeping the person that you are, then, move. I know it's not easy to do. I know that. And I'm not advocating that people just, get up and move jobs, because I think the more you become aware and the more you accept and embrace the person you are, you start to seek out opportunities and cultures that will fit you, because you know what you're looking for. Otherwise, so many people, men and women, end up in roles, then the role might be right, but the culture's wrong. And culture is going to be way more impactful than the role in terms of, your experience.
It's interesting. I was looking at a LinkedIn post recently. I'm a big fan of Amy Edmondson and the work that she's done around psychological safety. And it occurred to me today that is psychological safety seen and felt differently by men and women? Because I'm seeing more and more women who, when they reach, I'm going to just use 50s. At this point, we have the experience behind us. We have the education behind us. We've kind of been there, done that. And I think women start to come into their own a little bit more agency, more voice. It's sort of like, what do I have to prove? And that's not always received well, right? For the woman listening that isn't the most direct today, maybe the woman that is now in her 50s saying, well, yeah, I'm very comfortable speaking up, but I don't find that it's very well received. So I do wonder if your fit for culture can even change as you evolve and develop and take more agency.
Absolutely. I mean, early on in my career, I was way more compromising, if you like, than I got to be. Because, yes, you've got the experience and you have less self-doubt, actually, and more self-belief, because you wouldn't have got to where you got if you'd been rubbish, right? So, you know that you can do the job. So it becomes less about the ability to do the job. The competence is around the job, which is more important when you're coming up through your career. And the focus then becomes, well, where can I do this job best? Where is the fit best for me? And some of the women I coach have been in, for example, in management consultancies where they can do the job, but they can't stand going to work because the culture is wrong. And so they've moved into NGOs or third sector or whatever, because the job's the same, but the culture is so much more them. And you have to find your tribe. You have to find where you fit. And I think you're right. Early on in your career, you probably perhaps more willing to compromise and actually a bit more resilient, because I don't know about you, but when I got to a certain stage and I basically thought, sod it, I am who I am and I'm a cantankerous old woman and I'm going to say it like it is, and that's it. You like it or you don't like it. And that's that. But it's much more difficult to do that when you're in your 30s and you're still navigating everything and not quite sure where it's all going to end up, hence the importance of a plan. But that's also why I think, your point about older women feeling more agency, they're the women that should open doors for the younger women, the ones that are less confident to put themselves forward. Provide the openings for them, ask them their opinion in meetings, bring them into the conversation. Don't expect them to, all of a sudden be noticed because they're not comfortable in that space. Whereas, many more guys are. They're taught to be more articulate and more confident from a younger age, more less risk averse than women. That's the whole thing that between, not nature, nurture, etc., between the way girls and boys are brought up has a big impact on later on in your career.
It certainly does. And by the way, I should say that the cantankerous, direct side of you is what I fell in love with. So from your podcast, I'm like, this woman says it like it is. There's no mincing words. She puts it out there. And that was, for me, that was something very endearing. You're leading down the path of this notion of knowing your worth. As you're talking about, so to summarize the earlier point for the woman listening, it's be true to yourself. Be true to yourself and know very clearly what you stand for, what your non-negotiables are, what your purpose is, so that you can then determine whether or not the culture of the organization is a good fit for you, where you feel you can truly be yourself. But part of that, to your point, is knowing your worth. This woman I referred to earlier that I was talking to said, I think I deserve more money for all of these things they keep having me do. And I said, you think you do or you do? I want you to tell me you deserve more money with confidence. That hesitancy of knowing your worth. For the woman listening that is struggling with that, how do you unpack that? How do you become more confident and knowing really what your value is?
I think there's a whole load of psychology that goes into this as well, which I have never ventured down in my coaching. I kind of, avoided all of that. But I think, self-esteem, self-belief, knowing your value, knowing your worth, one of the easiest ways to continually to remind yourself of that is to, I think it's Mel Robbins that says, you give yourself a high five in the morning for getting out of bed, for doing stuff. And it's very similar to that. So often we forget what we've done during the day, during the week, during the year. So often we forget how much we've achieved. It's really interesting how sometimes our perception of what we've done, we limit it and we gloss over it and we dumb it down and we don't give it sufficient weight. And one of the ways to remind yourself of what you've achieved, and this helps from a practical perspective as well when it comes to performance reviews and salary reviews, etc., is to journal everything that you've done and achieved, little and large. It doesn't really matter how significant or insignificant it feels, because that acts as your guide, your Bible, if you like. When you're having those, oh gosh, can I really do this? Should I apply for that job? Should I apply for that promotion? You can go back to that and say, look what I've done. Look at the body of work. Look at what I've achieved. And remind yourself how damn good you are. Because, I coached a girl once, woman, and it was just after COVID. And it was remarkable. She was telling me during this coaching session that during COVID, she'd published a children's travel book on Amazon. Now, this was when KDP was just beginning. So, this was in, 2021. And I said, have you told anybody at work about that? And she said, oh, no. And I said, why? And she said, well, it's not that important, is it? I was like, really? So you researched this book, you wrote this book, you found a way of publishing. I was like, well, you could do a really good lunch and learn. People would be so excited to hear that you'd done this. And, think what it would do for your profile. And she did go as far as trying to book a meeting with her MD to talk about it, and it never went any further because she didn't push it. But so that, that's just a great example of an experience that you can really build on and as a huge achievement, and reminding yourself it wasn't nothing. It wasn't, oh, I was just doing my job. It was a really significant achievement. And I think we forget those. And sometimes, depending on where you are in your career, just asking a question in a meeting of peers might be your big goal for the day. And there are ways to plan for that. You don't have to be direct. You don't have to be out there. You don't have to be a self-promotion expert. There are ways to be visible and be seen and grow your confidence by taking small steps and building on it. I think this idea that people are born confident, maybe some are, but most of us have to work at it. I did.
Yes, of course. Especially when you're moving into new spaces, right? It's one thing to be confident in something that you have a lot of experience in and you've done and as we continue to elevate or move into different industries, it takes us back. There's something you said I really want to highlight as it relates to knowing your worth, and I love this. It's advice I often give clients as well. I call it a highlight reel. So you talked about journal your achievements, because even to the point of the woman that wrote the children's book or what have you, is we're doing our job. And we're showing up and we're working hard because we're driven, ambitious women. And oftentimes we forget all that we've contributed and we downplay it to the earlier example. And so by sitting down and journaling, I gave this advice to a client this week. I want you to sit and what are the achievements that you've had over the last 3 years? And then sit and relish in that, celebrate that, right? To build that, wow, I really have done some things that I can be very proud of, to build back that internal narrative about that self-worth.
I think there's another thing that we do, and this is sort of part of, when I've coached on building your personal brand, is that very often I'll say, just give me a list of your 4 or 5 top strengths. I will immediately get things like I'm good with people, I'm organized, I meet my deadlines, I get the job done, just as examples. And my next challenge is, okay, unpack that. What does it require from you as an individual to always meet your deadlines? What does it require from you as an individual to be organized? Why are you? How are you? How does it manifest you being a people person? That's empathy. That's insight. That's listening. All of these things are just, again, gets wrapped up into some soundbite without really considering what that says about you. Because not everybody is a people person. So you have to have those people skills. But again, it's one of those things that we just trot out as, in interviews, in conversation. Oh, that's what I'm good at. It's so much more than that. So take the time to dig. Take the time to dig into it.
You really personalize it and individualize it by asking that question, by saying, great, you're organized. What is it about being organized that makes you successful? What is the impact of that? Well, Mel, it has been amazing to have you. Again, I have been a fan for so long, and I love the fact that you just put it out there directly. For the woman listening, here's sage advice from Mel. Equality is under attack, and we can blame lots of things, but the reality is, what can we as women do? What can you do today to start putting your agency forward with intentionality, which is what I talk about all the time. So be true to yourself, even when it's hard. Create your highlight reel. Really live into all that you bring to the table and the value that you add. Understand your own worth. And ultimately recognize that you deserve to have agency in the workplace. You deserve to show up as your true and authentic self. I want to remind everybody that you can pick up a copy of Mel's book, Success Without Compromise, Empowering the Next Generation of Female Leaders to Achieve Success on Their Terms. This is available on Amazon and where books are sold. Thrilled that we were able to have Mel on from across the pond, despite some of the technology issues. Thank you, Mel. Thank you for your time. Thank you for leading the way and shining the path for myself and so many others. Do your work. Remember, invest in you today. The best bet you'll ever make is on yourself. That concludes today's episode of Climbing the Corporate Ladder Without Breaking a Heel. I'd be so grateful if you'd rate and comment on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Visit CynthiaBentzen-Mercer.com and find me on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Dr. Cynthia Bentzen-Mercer.